Okay, got that rolling. Okay, today I'm pleased to welcome back legendary investor Whitney Tilson, who we had on our show last month. Whitney's a graduate of Harvard Business School and a former fund manager, and now he's the founder and CEO of Empire Financial Research, which provides advice, commentary, and in-depth research and analysis to help people become better investors. We all want to be better investors, Whitney. He's also the author of several books, including the latest, The Art of Playing Defense, to be published later this fall or this year. I've read a draft copy, and it's really quite good. Whitney's an avid outdoor sportsman, and we've got some of those guys here too, Whitney, that you can, Ken Brown, I know. Whitney's a mountaineering guy, and he's climbed such famous peaks such as the Eiger and Yosemite's El Capitan recently. He's an active philanthropist, especially with education, as a founding member of Teach for America. And I promised Whitney the last time he was on the show, we had to have him back so we could talk about how we reform our public education system, and we will definitely do that today. Whitney is joined by 7 lucky subscribers of United We Stand, who jumped on the offer we sent out a few days ago to join us, so welcome, guys. I can tell you, unfortunately, we had to turn away a bunch of folks in order to maintain a manageable group here for the kind of good interactive discussion we want. So my guests are first Chris Provo, who is the CEO of wealth management firm Provo Financial in Massachusetts. Chris Dupuis, who is senior vice president at Kent International, the largest U.S. bike importer. We have Ken Brown, a senior sales leader at HPE Financial Services, and he's in central Massachusetts. We're missing David Quinn, so he may join a little later. Rick McCarthy is a retired teacher and coach. He lives in Vero Beach and now spends time tutoring underprivileged kids. And finally, Heidi Schroeder, who works at a classical liberal arts school in Colorado and is a brand new foster mom with 2 new daughters. Congratulations, Heidi. And we've got David Quinn coming on here. So David is a wealth manager from, let me see if I have to let him in. Should be fine. David's a wealth manager from Jackson, Wyoming. And I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back, Whitney. Great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we get started on the election planning segment, I got to get a COVID update for New York City. How are you guys doing there?
Yeah, incredibly well. The Northeast in general, I think partly because we got hit very, very badly, much worse than the rest of the country initially, that had 2 effects. To the extent there is some developing herd immunity, we probably got it earlier than others because we got hit so bad. And also, because we got hit so bad, people are probably more inclined to practice social distancing, mask wearing, things like that. And we've been very slow to reopen. New York City only at the end of this month is allowing any indoor dining and at that point, wow, only 25% capacity. Whereas most of the rest of the country, for example, restaurants are open for indoor dining, with much less limited restrictions. So, but the good news is New York City, our positivity rate's been under 1% every day for more than a month.
That's great.
The numbers are, the number of hospitalizations and deaths is de minimis. So knock on wood, we're doing okay. Better than very well.
That's fabulous. Let's go around the horn real quick, and in true Monty Python bridge troll fashion, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I want you to answer 3 questions. Your name, where do you live, and what's happening with COVID where you live? Chris, we'll start with you.
Sure. Christopher Provo. I live in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and very similar to New York City. Hit very hard. Everybody here takes it extremely serious. If you walk into a CVS without a mask, you get kicked out. It's that easy.
Ken Brown?
I live in Ashburnham, Massachusetts, which is north central part of the state, right on the New Hampshire border. And it's not a whole lot different than what Chris just described. A little bit more rural, so maybe a little bit more laid back. Probably won't get kicked out of that CVS, but you'll get some looks.
Yes,
that's about it.
Chris Dupuis.
Chris Dupuis, Vero Beach, Florida. I would say, by the way, I grew up in Ashburnham, Massachusetts, Ken Brown. So that's
wow.
I would say in Vero Beach, it's not too different from usual. I mean, we have you need to wear masks in grocery stores and in restaurants
to start with.
Yeah, to start with. But other than that, not. We have extremely low case rate to begin with, so that's probably the main driving factor here.
Rick McCarthy, you live in Vero too, but
I'm
a little
also
different
Vero.
situation.
I would, I would echo those comments. My main concern is getting out of here to get up to the Northeast and get let in, and getting back without having to sit by myself for 2 weeks. So, but in terms of day-to-day life, there's golf. We go out occasionally with some safety, and again, not too different from normal life.
Heidi, how are things where you are?
Yeah, I live in South Denver, Colorado. People are very outdoorsy here, so that has carried on for the most part as usual. I work in a school. It's a very small private school with a lot of mission-aligned, like-minded families, meaning feels like a normal school. People, not really, kids aren't wearing masks, teachers aren't really wearing masks. I think we're slightly scared we're going to get caught or something, but so far so good. It's week 4 and just a few cases of the sniffles, so we're good.
Great. David Quinn, how are things out in Wyoming?
They are, yeah, hang on. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, in Jackson, there sounds like a little bit like Jackson, Wyoming, Vero Beach. Our big issue is schools. I mean, putting kids back to school 2 days a week and trying to do the homeschool. That's kind of our biggest. Two young kids, that's tough.
That's good. Well, this is great. I mean, so if you get a sense here, Whitney and everybody, people from different parts of the country, the diversity that we have here, they're treating it a little differently, but with an overlay of sameness, which I think is good. Certainly mask wearing and social distancing is part of the equation. So I want to leg into a big, hairy question for Whitney here. And, I'd like you to, I had an opportunity to spend some time on one of Whitney's podcasts earlier in the week, and he talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to get his take on what's going to happen here in 2020. So that's thing one. And thing two, and again, the game rules are, we're not advocating for any particular candidate. This is just Whitney's reasoned estimate of who's going to win this thing, how it's going to come out. And thing number 2 is, how do you position your portfolio, your career? How do you look at this? What industries he thinks will benefit? So with that, Whitney?
Yeah, sure. Well, as a little bit of background, I'm in the investment advice business. I ran a hedge fund for 17 years where I actually managed people's money. And a year and a half ago or so, I launched Empire Financial Research, which publishes a number of investment newsletters, some more smaller cap or larger cap, some more growth or value, but basically we're trying to give good investment advice, good sound investment advice to average Americans. We maybe twice a year, when I have 2 other colleagues and I, who are the 3 main writers and stock pickers for the different newsletters we publish. And the 3 of us really approach investing, approach politics. We're very different, and that's deliberate. So we have a diversity of opinion in my organization. And when the 3 of us agree on something that we don't think is being properly priced in the market, we sometimes put together a big webinar like we did last week. The first one we did was back in March. Literally the day the market bottomed, we put together a 2-hour free webinar with 30,000 people on it, saying this is the best time to buy stocks since the Great Recession back in 2008. And so that was a very prescient call and was a big boost to our business when it was proven correct, right? So just last week, we put together a webinar saying, look, we come from different political backgrounds, but all of us are simply looking at the polls, both for key Senate races, as well as in the key states that will determine the presidency. And all of us believe that Biden is likely to win and Democrats will win control of the Senate. And not many people are out there making that prediction. I don't think it's priced into the market, because Democrats don't want to put out this line of thinking out there, because it'll lead to complacency, which they believe cost them the election 4 years ago. and also it'll hurt their fundraising. And of course, Republicans don't want to say that they think this is going to happen because this is what they dread. So nobody's talking about what is statistically likely. So let me say this is not a partisan position. We are not espousing our own political beliefs, but rather trying to give good investment advice based on setting emotion aside, which is what you have to do to be a successful investor, and look at the statistics. Now, the two websites that I go to, sort of my go-to, are a betting website called Predict It, where I have actually bet personally. You can bet up to $850 on any individual bet. They have hundreds of bets. You can bet on who's going to win the presidency, who's going to win the Senate, who's going to win any individual state. And they also have bets outside, like who's going to win the Oscars, right. Will inflation end the year above a certain level, things like that. But I use it and it's based on real people betting real money. And so it's been quite accurate. And every day the pricing changes. So I'll tell you on Predict It right now, Biden is 60% likely to win. So it's not a cinch for sure. But likely. And
has that come down at all over the past, say, couple weeks?
It's fluctuated a bit. It's actually up a couple points maybe in the last week or so, but it's been as high as maybe 63, got down into the mid 50s, back up to 60. So it's
range bound.
And it's been range bound for a number of months because the polls have been range bound for a number of months. Biden, if you go back and look at sort of the consensus polls, and this is the other website I look to, but by the way, let me just finish on Predict It. They believe Democrats have a 55% chance of winning the Senate, which could be a 50-50 tie, in which case whoever wins the presidency controls the Senate, right? So the other website I look to is 538.com. And they are not a polling organization themselves, but they feed every poll on every race into a very sophisticated model and predicts. They actually are even more bullish, believing that Biden is 77% likely to win as of right now, and Democrats are 62% likely to take the Senate. My guess is the odds are somewhere in between those 2 points, but all data points, no matter who you look at, show a better than even chance of Democrats controlling a Democratic clean sweep, controlling both the presidency and both houses of Congress. So what are the investment implications of this? People disagree. I mean, there are a lot of people who think the stock market's going to drop 25% if this happens. They see higher taxes and anti-business regime, et cetera. But keep in mind, people thought the stock market would collapse if a crazy reality TV star with no governing experience won, and look what happened, right?
Right.
So we're not making a big prediction about the market, but we are looking at certain sectors. And there are probably 6 sectors that we covered in a special report we put together for our subscribers that we covered some of in our webinar. But let me give you just a taste. One stock we really like is a small retailer called Citi Trends, CITI, Citi Trends, that serves low-income people who will benefit if there's a $15 minimum wage implemented nationally. A company, Smith & Wesson, makes guns. Now you would think, wait, why would it be good for a gun manufacturer if an anti-gun Democratic sweep occurs? And the answer is the people who buy guns will panic and buy more guns. If you actually look at gun sales in the United States, it is exactly inversely correlated with parties in power, i.e. when Democrats are in power, gun owners buy a lot more guns because they think Democrats are going to take the guns or restrict the sales of guns.
I love the data, Whitney. This is great.
So actually, because of the whole George Floyd protests and the economic uncertainty, even pre-election, gun sales right now in America are running double what they were a year ago. So Smith & Wesson stock is already up a bunch, but we think in the event of a Democratic sweep on November 3rd, that you're going to continue to see a real tailwind, and the stock's got a lot more upside. So I could go on, and I've gone on too long here, but legalization of cannabis, legalization of online betting, a big green energy push. And what are the companies that will benefit from green energy? The likelihood of an infrastructure bill getting passed that pours $1 trillion or $2 trillion into infrastructure. What are the companies that will benefit there? So that's the kind of thinking that we're doing and recommending, specific stocks that we think are good companies. The stocks will do well, even if the forecasts don't pan out, but will do especially well in the event of a Democratic sweep.
Great. And so you haven't, and just to illustrate for the folks, or to clarify for the folks, your team is ideologically diverse. You've got some conservative folks, you've got some liberal folks, but the consensus among you all is that the Democrats are likely, at least Biden is likely to be president, and even money for them to take the Senate.
Yeah, we're giving advice based on and look, we're not saying it's a certainty at all.
Of course not, right.
What we're saying is, here are the stocks, here's a portfolio of 8 stocks, and you can pick and choose among them if to protect your portfolio. So this isn't just a portfolio for investors who lean left. In fact, investors who lean right and who are going to be in despair if this comes about, well, at least one saving grace will be they might make a lot of money if they own some of these stocks.
That's great. That's great. I'd love to go around the horn now and have some questions, with the guests. And if you've got questions for Whitney, just I think there's a pretty intimate group here. Just go ahead and speak up. Chris Provo.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we get is for companies like Salesforce, Adobe, NVIDIA. It seems to be a very tech-biased allocation as far as the portfolio goes, which is fine. I understand that some of those companies are really doing very well with the whole stay-at-home and what's happening with the economy. I was curious that you mentioned companies that really aren't tech at all. What's your thought about tech?
Yeah. I hesitate. I pause a little bit because I have mixed feelings. I mean, tech has been so hot, and the tech giants have been driving the market and driving the S&P. If you don't own them, you've been left behind. Generally speaking, I started my investing career back in 1999 and lived through the internet bubble. The last time tech stocks accounted for this large a percentage of the S&P 500, for example. And I do not think today we are at that kind of extreme bubble. I see it sort of rhymes, but it's not the same. So, I don't think Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft today are anything near as extremely valued as the tech giants of that era. When Cisco was trading at 180 times earnings, and today, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook are trading at maybe 30 times earnings, depending on if you look at trailing or next year's or whatever. So the valuation isn't as extreme. So I'm not super bearish on tech, but we're definitely starting, we're trying to have a diverse portfolio. So my favorite among the tech giants is Amazon, which is probably in some ways the least techy of those companies. Right. And
it's tech infrastructure, really.
Yeah, I mean, we just see a very long runway, and there's, to the extent their Amazon Web Services is they're selling picks and shovels to the rest of the tech industry, so they're benefiting there. And so it's just hard to see what slows down Amazon. All the other companies have issues that I'm not bearish. I wouldn't short any of them, but Amazon just has the cleanest growth runway, in my opinion. But I would urge people not to fall into the mistake that a lot of people fell into, the last time tech was all the rage, and think that they have a diversified portfolio because they own 8 different tech stocks. So, among the 8 stocks that benefit, for example, in our latest special issue of my Empire Investment Report newsletter, where we did the special issue with the 8 stocks to benefit from a Democratic sweep, only one of them is a tech stock. Sort of an autonomous driving stock that will benefit from the rise of electric cars and autonomous vehicles, which we think will get a real tailwind under a Democratic sweep. So, the rest are, an infrastructure company, a gun company, a retailer, a cannabis company, and actually one is sort of techie. It's an online sports betting company, So those are, we're trying to give people a reasonably diversified portfolio.
Chris Dupuis.
How do you feel about the commercial real estate market? What do you see that doing in 2021?
Yeah. It's not a sector that I've done a lot of investing in, and I don't know how much of what I'm seeing in New York is applicable more broadly. But in New York, the large number of the tenants are not paying or are paying small amounts, and so I certainly wouldn't want to own anything in a big city right now. They tend to be quite levered, so there's a lot of debt ahead of you, and if a lot of folks aren't paying, and it's not clear to me how quickly people are going to be returning to cities and signing these long-term leases. The market, what happens when markets collapse is the first phase is they freeze up. In other words, transactions fall dramatically because, the buyers and sellers are light years apart. And so you saw that in the price of houses when the housing bubble burst or the internet bubble burst or whatever. So it's hard to know how much commercial real estate pricing has fallen in big cities, certainly in New York. Don't get seduced by a big dividend, because that's the first thing that'll get cut when a company is trying to right size its balance sheet. So I'm not going to say blanket, don't look at it or look for shorts in the sector, but I'd say be very careful and make sure you're not the sucker at the poker table. That you really understand the underlying assets that particular company owns, and that those tenants are going to be paying.
I think I was asking more, do you see a collapse of commercial real estate as a likelihood in 2021? It should have been a better question.
Yeah. The answer is it depends. Companies with a lot of leverage that are sort of street level retail in New York City and all, and there's some real estate companies that are very heavily New York City focused, or are professional service. I mean, I can tell you, I live on the Upper East Side of New York. My peer group and all the people I know and talk to are people who work at hedge funds, law firms, accounting firms, professional service firms that have very expensive office space in Midtown New York. And those buildings are 90% empty. And it's not clear to me they're ever going to go back to 100%. What we're doing right now on Zoom, professionals are able to work remotely, and if you just look if you look anecdotally, but even statistically, at the moving companies, but also real estate in areas surrounding. I'm up here in New Hampshire. Real estate market is white hot up here because all the Boston people are going to spend most of their time up here. Maybe they'll just hop down to Boston, hour and a half drive, and go into the office one day a week or a couple of days every 2 weeks. But they're going to permanently relocate, and that's going to have huge negative consequences for commercial real estate. Now, eventually, it'll get filled with smaller firms and startups and so forth, but at half the price, at half the rent. When you have half the rent coming in, if that's your base case that you get back to, and a big pile of debt on that, I'm not sure how much is left for the equity. So I'd be very careful.
Thank you.
Ken Brown, any thoughts?
Apologies on muting. Along the same lines, what other industries are you looking at and saying, I'd probably stay away from that industry or those industries?
Well, let's talk about the industries that have been hit the hardest. Would be all small private companies. There's talk on Yelp of half the restaurants in America. I think that's probably too high, but a quarter might not reopen, right? But you can't. There's no public market play there. Actually, the public restaurant companies have the scale, the access to capital, can put in drive-throughs. So stocks, I don't know, like Chipotle and Starbucks and stuff are at all-time highs. But industries, the movie industry, movie theaters, cruise ships, and airlines are three that have just been hammered. We recommended the stock of Spirit Airlines to our subscribers pre-COVID. Stock's gotten whacked, but we have not pulled our recommendation on Spirit because people are still going to fly, and Spirit has by far the lowest cost structure. out there, and whereas the majors are very dependent on business travelers and the perks and the first class seats and stuff like that, and it's not clear to me again how much of that is ever coming back. Whereas I think the discount travelers who just want to hop down to Florida, down to Vero Beach or whatever, that's already starting to come back. Right now, the U.S. airline industry, just as of yesterday, the number of passengers is down 70%. Now that's terrible, but it was down 96%. So it's slowly coming back. Another stock I'm looking at, just as an example, is a company called Volaris, which trades on the U.S. Stock Exchange, but it's Mexico's largest carrier. It's the Spirit Airlines of Mexico. But unlike in the United States, where Spirit Airlines has 5% market share, Volaris has 30% market share. They're more like Southwest Airlines. They're sort of a giant down there, and there are only 4 airlines in all of Mexico, and 2 of them are in bankruptcy. So a company like Volaris, and by the way, in Mexico, the number of people who fly versus take buses, there's something like 30 times the number of people take buses than fly in Mexico. It's a poorer country. So you can see a long-term tailwind of people shifting onto airplanes. And by the way, the Mexican airline market has rebounded a lot faster than the US market. They're only down like 30%, and we're still down 70%. So, I'm picking and choosing in the airline market, looking for the domestic carriers that don't have the international routes, that don't rely on the business travelers, that have super low cost structures. Honestly, I wouldn't touch the cruise lines. I think those cruise ships are floating petri dishes.
We know that. I knew that before COVID, having kids that have gone on Disney cruises and, visiting and, with relatives on vacations. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just it's going to kill it.
Yeah, so I'm avoiding cruise lines. The stocks are so volatile. So they can be good trading sardines, but they're just not ones I think you can buy and hold. I will say I've got some personal money, and a number of our recommendations are in the banking sector, which right now banks are cheaper than they were in 2008 on a price to book basis, which is crazy because the banks right now actually have much stronger balance sheets. The financial system is not coming to an end. They've all taken large reserves for COVID, but the stocks are very, very cheap, and this sector is terribly out of favor. And, I'll toss to your readers, we actually just recommended in another one of my newsletters, Empire Stock Investor, Wells Fargo, which is the most hated bank in the most hated sector. But Wells Fargo is the largest bank in America by number of branches. It's one of the 4 giants. It's a very profitable oligopoly. Actually, deposits right now are at an all-time high. It's been horribly mismanaged, but they've got a new CEO coming in to fix it. And it's a classic turnaround story that I've made a lot of money on, buying blue chip companies that aren't going away when they're absolutely hated. And then you can double or triple your money if you just have some patience and a strong stomach.
That's great. We've got about half an hour left here. I think maybe if someone's got a quick question on the markets and investing for Whitney, let's do that now. And then I want to leg into our discussion about public education reform.
I just wanted to ask, what's your thinking about a situation where the election is contested and there's chaos?
Yeah.
Jim, you brought that up. What do you guys?
Yeah.
How much cash? In other words, how much cash are you telling your investors? Hold this much dry powder or this range, because the range of uncertainty here is the confidence interval. Let's say might be higher than you'd like.
On Predict It, one of the bets is how many days after the election will the election be called in favor of one person or the other? And normally, one of the answers is that night, because that's always been the answer.
That's right.
Then you can bet on the next day, then days 2 through 5, 5 through 10, and X number of months, right? So there's a very active betting market, and right now, I forget what the exact odds were, but it's less than 50% chance that the election is called that night. Look, you don't have to, whatever your opinion is on Donald Trump is, I think you can take him at his word that he's going to contest the hell out of it in every possible way. He said that. That's the
so did the Democrats, said the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, everyone's gearing up for a contested election now. Look,
Are those buying opportunities, Whitney?
um, um,
Because that level of chaos, is that an entry point from your your potential?
I guess it depends on how much the market falls. I actually think if you think about what is good for stock markets, it's lots of stimulus, fiscal and monetary stimulus. And if you look at Joe Biden's plans, he wants to spend even more money than has been spent to date, right?
Right.
And so he could actually Democrats could end up spending like crazy, and that stimulates the economy and stimulates stock market. So it's not clear to me. I don't have a strong feeling that the market moves dramatically no matter who wins. I do think a contested election could roil things a bit if there are people out in the streets protesting, et cetera. I think the American democracy is pretty strong and we'll eventually sort it out. And so I would view any big pullback, more than 10% as a buying opportunity generally. So I guess that's my view. And by the way, your question about cash is I am 35% cash in my personal portfolio. So I'm 65% invested in a bunch of blue chip stocks. And by the way, the S&P 500 index, there's a very simple answer. The default answer for any investor who wants exposure to stocks, which I think is a lot better than bonds these days, which yield nothing,
Sure.
right? If you have a long-term investment horizon, that's not a short-term call. Just buy the S&P 500 index and go about your life, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to try and do better than the index, then you can try and buy some blue chip stocks and buy some beaten down Wells Fargo and some Smith & Wesson playing a Democratic landslide or something like that, right? But a good chunk of my long-term savings is just in the S&P 500 index. I don't have to think about it or worry about it or whatever, and I just ride the American business, right?
Yep.
And I'm long-term bullish on that, but I'm 35% cash because I wasn't 35% cash in the third week of March. I was like 10% cash. I put a lot of money to work in the downturn, but the stock market's rallied 50, 60% in a very short period of time. And the economy is still, in recovery mode.
Right.
So I took some money off the table. So it's partly, the market's at all-time highs when the economy is close to all-time lows. It's definitely recovering, but it's still in a ditch, right? Mm-hmm. So the combination of that disconnect of an all-time high stock market with an almost all-time bad economy, combined with the possibility of election uncertainty 5 weeks from now, means, I'll put a third of my money in cash and, wait for another pullback to put money to work. That's what I generally try to do.
Makes sense. All right. I think I'd like to leg over to public education, education reform. I know that is a thing that's near and dear to you, Whitney, as it is with me. We do lots of, most of our volunteering in philanthropy is around education because we view it as the Marshall Plan of our time. I think we can all agree that on average, American public education needs a hell of a lot of help. We can argue over whether that means just throw more money at it or what are the structural changes. So I'd love to get your take quickly, Whitney, and then we're going to get our guests in here as we've got some folks with teaching experience and get their take as well.
Sure. Just as quick background, my parents were both teachers. They met and married in the Peace Corps, teaching English in the Philippines for a couple of years, just before I was born. My dad has a doctorate in education from Stanford, is specializing in educational projects in third world countries. So I lived all over the world, Tanzania, Nicaragua growing up. My parents were retired in Kenya. And they were both teachers. My father was a dean of faculty at a prep school called Northfield Mount Herman in Western Mass that I attended. So I come from teachers, and early on always had an interest in education, and through a random set of coincidences was employee number 2 at Teach for America when Wendy Kopp was starting it in 1989. And she introduced me 10 years later to a guy named Dave Levin, who founded KIPP Charter Schools, which is called Knowledge is Power program. It's the largest nonprofit network of charter schools in the country. So I've been on the board there for 20 years. So I've been deeply involved in education reform and just sort of big picture. The American educational system spends more than pretty much any other developed country and doesn't get bottom of the barrel results, but sort of mediocre results. And some of that's due to not spending our money very well. And some of it has to do with external factors. In the United States, about, how seriously young people and their parents take education and so forth, relative to Asian countries, that kind of thing. But I would say, generally speaking, I would say the top 10 or 20% of the public schools in America are really world-class, and people are getting a great education, going off to four-year colleges with well-prepared to do college-level work. You then have the middle 60%, which is everyone thinks they're doing well, but it's really pretty mediocre. And everyone, cheers for the football team and the basketball team, and everybody gets good grades, and they're happy schools. They're not failing schools, but there's no real rigor. The standards are not super high. Most of the kids might be going off to, either community colleges or not real competitive four-year schools. And they're not ready to do college level work by anyone's definition. They might be a year behind grade level, but they got good grades. They don't know that until they get to college, right? Mm-hmm. And then the bottom 20% of our schools, serving almost exclusively low-income minority children, are disasters, where there's almost no rigor or standards, and where some states have good funding, but most states, they're very poorly funded schools, because keep in mind, our schools are by and large funded by local property taxes. Right. So it's a system that perpetuates the inequality that exists in our society, is of course then manifested in the school system because it's funded the same way, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's where I've really focused my efforts, through KIPP Charter Schools, serves basically 99% minority children.
Yep. And tremendously successful. KIPP's one of the most successful networks that are out there. Success Academies, KIPP.
We prove that spending the same amount of money that we are sending, our college graduation rate is now, of the students who finish with us in 8th grade or our high schools, the vast majority go to school. There's a terrible dropout problem at the college level, but we're still getting now more than 50% of our kids are earning four-year college degrees in a demographic cohort of low-income minority kids where only 8% nationally are earning four-year college degrees.
That's great results.
So, it's, as an American, I find it outrageous that we have an educational system where the color of your skin and your zip code are the two primary things that determine the quality of public school you get. And the countries that are doing much better than us across the board are ones that do not allow that kind of inequality in the educational system to exist. So that's sort of what I've been fighting for. And just the question is, okay, well, what do you do about it? Well, the answer is you have two different problems. The mediocre middle 60% is a question of raising the bar and setting standards higher, and stop lying to parents and the kids that they're really getting a really good world-class education where you can compete in an increasingly competitive world. So
thing one is stop lying to the 60%. I'm a middle ground kind of guy, or seeking middle ground here. And that's where the country pivots. And that's the thing that has to work better than it does now. So
for example, I noticed a couple of your guests here from Massachusetts, a state I lived in for 16 years. Massachusetts, 25 years ago, set high-level state tests, benchmarked to international standards, and then published the information. So everybody knew how they were doing. Every student, every parent, every school, every principal, every teacher, everybody knew, and they weren't the easily gameable, dumbed-down tests that don't really mean much, but really rigorous tests.
Right.
And Massachusetts benefits from very good demographics. A very high percentage of Massachusetts citizens have college degrees, which obviously benefits the children. But Connecticut, for example, has the same demographics, did not set the bar high. And Massachusetts, over 10 or 20 years, educational outcomes ramped up to among the highest among all states in the country.
And the economy, by the way, that followed, because the Connecticut economy is a disaster.
Yes. So that's big picture. I mean, there's no silver bullet here. You got to do 100 different things, but big picture,
I want to get some of my guests in here,
Yeah.
with some questions. Heidi Schroeder, you come from the sort of private sector, but I mean, what are you seeing in education that you think is matters and how we fix public education?
Yeah, I really appreciate your thoughts, Mr. Tilson. I actually started in the inner city Chicago teaching. I taught at the Noble Network, which is, they won the Broad Prize when I was there. So that was my first experience with education. And I'll admit I was frustrated because it seemed what sort of stuck out to me was this sort of 50% and kind of the 50% that when I was there, 35% of the kids were getting college degrees. And so there was this sort of, I felt like we were lifting them up to cross the graduation stage. And then it was like, okay, good luck to you.
Yeah.
And it was, again, felt as if that sort of 60% lie was still in place where there were just, it was way better, like so much better than where they were supposed to go, so to speak. But I still felt like we were sort of duping them in a way. And so then I tried to start my own charter school in Chicago. So my thought and question, classical charter school through the Barney Charter School Initiative. And so I got immersed with political fun in Chicago and the unions. And so it was like charter. I was all in gusto. I moved to Colorado to help open a charter school. Charter is definitely the way. I cannot believe I'm working in a private school in affluent Colorado. I'm like, who have I become? But
you found the unions were an issue with just being able to launch it.
Just even we showed the demand, parents wanted it. It was this, it's like thinking, okay, yes, of course, offering a better education, but knowing, like you said, there's 100 things to do because we couldn't even get to point A. We were at, way trying just to get it open and we couldn't get there. So just the reform in Chicago that needed to happen was
tough town, Chicago.
Overwhelming.
So
yeah.
Whitney, just to, how, I think we have to, the elephant in the room here, one of the elephants in the room are the public sector unions.
Yeah.
And, I come from, my dad was a school teacher for 20 years. He retired as a school teacher. He was on the negotiating team that negotiated the collective bargaining contract. So he did that for years, and where I grew up in Massachusetts. But he now doesn't really kind of subscribe to that because he sees, as he explains it, they really start negotiating their own interests, and it's not the same interests as kids. And when you scale that over the hundreds of billions that we spend in education, and the facts are they're quite political. The unions are all interest and lobbyist groups. How do you solve that issue?
Yeah, it's definitely an issue. It's probably more of an issue than Democrats will admit and less of an issue than Republicans think, is my sense. Because I can tell you in states, southern states or right to work states where the teacher unions don't have nearly the power that they do in the northern cities, the schools are just as terrible. The educational inequalities and outcomes are just as bad, right?
No doubt.
But yes, unions are a huge obstacle to innovation, like charter schools that Heidi was trying to start, my KIPP charter schools and all. And they're very politically powerful. They're well funded. They've got their lobbyists in Albany and in all the state capitals. For a while there, when Obama was president, Arne Duncan was Secretary of Education, we were really able to move the ball on reform. And it isn't just losing Obama as president, because he was a community organizer in Chicago, so he saw on the ground what was really happening. So he was a real champion for a lot of the reforms and charter schools. But it's also just sort of happenstance. 2% of all U.S. school children are educated in New York City, and we went from Bloomberg to De Blasio, which couldn't be more of a positive to negative shift as far as charter schools, for example.
It is. Rick,
So it's definitely there's definitely a political angle. One of the things that I in my journey over 30 years of education reform is not only supporting things like Teach for America and KIPP that are doing great things on the ground, but also organizing politically. And supporting candidates, supporting Democrats who are willing to break with the teachers union. I do worry as an education reformer, if Biden wins, his wife is a school teacher, an educator. I think she may teach at the college level. I forget. But years ago, I went to a fundraiser with them and tried to engage them on charter schools and got absolutely nowhere. And so as far as a education reform oriented Democrat, Biden is
not going to happen. Right.
Now, but look, you got to play the hand that you're dealt. So the organizations I'm involved with are gearing up to, if Biden does win, to make sure he appoints a Secretary of Education that's at least acceptable to us, not just the teacher union candidate, right? Because that can make a huge difference.
Rick McCarthy, you are a retired school teacher down in Vera. Where did you teach school, Rick?
Well, I'm a teacher coach kind of guy. I've kind of run the gamut. I taught at Bassick High School in Bridgeport and Hill House High School in New Haven.
No.
And I went from there to be a teacher at the Choate School.
Okay. So
very well. I went to Exeter.
Okay.
I also was a administrator at a state university in Connecticut for 10 years, assistant director of admissions, and did some coaching there. And I've sort of been a teacher coach my entire career and involved with education. I'm still an assistant coach at Wesleyan University, believe it or not. I fly up and coach most of the season with them. I've been with them for 15 years.
What sport do you coach?
Lacrosse.
Lax. Okay.
I actually coached lacrosse 1 year at Vero Beach High.
No kidding. When they were good. Well, now St. Edwards is the class of the county, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but they're I would tell you the parents have ruined that. I mean, we were sixth in the state and beat a lot of teams, but I couldn't deal with a situation.
So Rick, I want to get your take. If in a minute or so, like what you have a question for Whitney or just for the group?
Well, yeah.
What do you see the big problem is in public education, and how do you address it?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on his statement about the 60%. I wonder about characterizing schools as good schools or bad schools where, like take Vero Beach High. You have like class A type students that are getting a real education, although a lot of that actually takes place by them taking college level courses.
You're having tutors.
Well, no, I mean, they're prepared. They come in, they can actually do real work. And then you have a huge number of students who can't really do anything, but they get promoted anyway. Mm-hmm. There's a young man that I spend a lot of time with. He's a Haitian kid, and he can't really multiply and divide. He's in the 10th grade and he's passing, but he can't multiply and divide. Right. He thought you could drive a car to Haiti, where his family's from. So he doesn't know a heck of a lot about geography or anything else, but somehow he gets past.
Yeah.
And I know a couple of people who have told me that they earned their associate degree while they were at Vero Beach High. So what it tells me is that in this, flood to, this rush to, school accountability and promotion rates and graduation rates, what's happened in large part is a lowering of standards. And so within the same school, you have kids who are getting a fine education competitive to what I got that upper 10% of kids in the AP classes and taking college classes, then you have a huge swath of students that don't do much, barely literate. And then you have some that are illiterate, but they're promoted anyway for political reasons.
So just real quick, I know that Rick, you do volunteer work with underprivileged kids. I do the same thing here in Vera, so I see exactly the baseline you're talking about. I know Whitney does that. I know Heidi has done that. Is volunteering, and is it? I guess the question would be, is it right for us to expect the solution to come from government, or is the solution going to come from us?
Government is, I don't see it's the solution, but I also see the foundation of the problem as being a lack of respect for the educational process among a large part of the population. And I also believe that, and I'm getting more and more along these lines, that we have to have much more major intervention much younger. I mean, when somebody is 3 and 4 grade levels behind and they're in the 7th grade, you can try to fix them up a little bit. And I've spent a lot of time the last couple of years trying to get them caught up, but it's hard, and it's hard for the kid who's in the 7th grade to be told that he has to do 2nd grade work, but that's what he needs.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think where we have to go is to the 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and really get them going with the education building blocks. Like if you studied psychology, that one of the theories of like imprinting is that you have to have a certain input at the right time of your development to learn it the best way. They've talk about language learning in that way. And I think it's also true for math learning and other learing.
Sure. I want to just get really quickly to Ken Brown. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I know Ken, you sat on the school committee in Ashby, and you've been very, very involved in the public education side. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah. So a lot of really good points, and I think probably the way that I want to, because I have such a short period of time, is when I was in school committee, I was vice chair for 2 years. I was finance committee chair for 3 years. The thing that shocked me was statistics on special ed. And the state average in Massachusetts, Whitney, you use that as an example, is 23% of students are on special ed. And it's something, the cost per student is exponentially higher than the average cost per student, but they don't want to talk about that. But what really shocked me is I have friends who are teachers or guidance counselors in major cities in Massachusetts, and that 23% becomes 65 and 75% when you get into these larger cities. And a lot of it has to do with social and economic conditions. And in particular, an awful lot has to do with family circumstances. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now with COVID is that being exacerbated, right? Because as students are being expected to learn at home or having a choice to go to school, the family circumstances have a profound impact on the ability of the family to support distance learning versus expecting the school system to take those students back. So I think it's a real test of our public education system, and maybe even pushes the dialogue further, faster than where that dialogue has been up to this point in the charter schools and voucher discussions, right? I'm a huge fan of alternative programs like the one that you were instrumental in founding, Whitney. In fact, my dad, Rick, was very instrumental in founding an alternative school in New Haven, Connecticut. So I think that's where the future has to go in addressing the kids that are getting left behind by the system.
Experimentation.
Yeah, but I think the problem is we have to admit that the current system is not working, And,
First.
I go back to Whitney's earlier comments that, we're not doing that. We're putting lipstick on a pig and saying it looks beautiful.
Right.
So,
And I can tell tell you that with COVID, I think it's really turning things inside out. I mean, I just think I think the private, schools are going to, probably get a big boost.
Right. In the public school where your kids go, Dave,
I mean,
what's the mix between online learning and in classroom learning?
well, they switched, I think it's, great deal, 50% more on learning, which,
50% online learning?
yeah, I would say.
Wow.
2
Wow.
days a week. So 50-60% online now. And, I just don't think these kids today,
Have the
are,
attention span, maybe.
have the ability to, some do, some don't. So,
Well, we keep using the term learning, and that's different from programming.
yeah,
Just because the kid's sitting there with a computer on doesn't mean he's actually learning anything.
It is. And I know the teachers don't like the online. Most of the teachers I talk to aren't fans of the online platform. Whitney, we've got a few minutes left, and I want to give you the final word here. You've heard some input from our guests. I think it spans a pretty good chunk of America geographically, public, private. Some good ideas here. What strikes you? What do you want to leave our listeners with regard to education reform?
Yeah, well, I guess first, I'm delighted to hear it seems like so many of you are really involved, tutoring, or administration and so forth, because we need people to care and to get involved. Because that's those adults are the ones who generally care the most. I do think it's very interesting. I sort of talked about the top 20%, middle 60, and then bottom 20%. And Rick points out, well, that's true within schools. It's true among schools nationally, which is very, very, very true. Even at the so-called better schools, you get an alarming number of students tracked and basically really not given much of an education. One of the things I thought No Child Left Behind did is it forced schools to report on how all the kids were doing, not just the majority of the kids, right? Mm-hmm. So look, there are no easy answers here. And I'm very worried about what happens educationally in the era of COVID, and because I don't think kids learn very well. It's hard enough for us as adults, who have the patience and experience and so forth to do work and interact and learn online like this. But I really worry about kids. So it's a super, super important issue. I encourage people to get involved in whatever way they care about and makes sense for them. And to understand that there's a very powerful political angle of this. At the end of the day, our educational system is a governmental system, which means ultimately it's controlled by politicians, and then which means you've got money, unions, votes,
all of it,
jobs, and keep in mind the kids don't have money, they don't vote. So it's a system. It's a system like, unfortunately, many of our big governmental systems. I would point to our criminal justice system, for example, that it seems to exist more for the jobs and for the votes than to actually do what's right for our citizens.
Right. Well, this has been great, everybody. Our time has expired. I feel as though this is a topic we could chew on for, take a bio break and do another hour, because it's a great topic, public education. And I really hope that we really see some momentum, regardless of who's elected president going forward. The answer to me is more experimentation, allow, charter schools to flourish, invest in the public schools, parents get involved, and we all have to realize that it's of all the common goods that we have in America, education is at the top of the list, if not there's nothing really much higher than that. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time. I think this is great. Our listeners are going to love this, and this won't be the last time we talk about education or the markets for that example. Thank you very much, Whitney.
Thank you, Jim.
Everyone else,
Thanks for putting this
Thank
together,
you.
Jim. Great to
Yeah.
see
Thank
you.
you.
Looking
bet.
good. Good.
take care, everyone.
Enjoyed it. Bye now.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.